When it comes to the relative profitability of Genshin Impact's limited time banners, it's only natural to think that it's a directly proportional result of general character popularity, which entails both the aesthetic aspects of the character and how they play in-game. To an extent that is true, but in actuality, it's a bit more complicated than that. Reruns are prime examples, given that sometimes they can do much better than the initial run and other times much worse. Since the characters themselves aren't changing, it must be due to the conditions which surround their releases. So for all of you out there who haven't completely kept up with the game across its 2 years, but are still curious to know why certain banners did so much better than others, today I will be nostalgically looking back on every limited character wish, explaining all of the factors both inside and outside of the game that affected their sales. In terms of the data that is going to be the basis for a lot of what I say in this video, I will be looking at GenshinLab.com's estimates of Chinese iOS revenue. The only other data I was able to get my hands on were these estimates of Japanese sales taken from a website called GameEye, and while there definitely are some differences between the two, the general trends are very similar. I can't personally speak to the credibility of either of these, but for the sake of the video, we will trust in Genshin Lab. Note that since dual banners are listed together, the figures represent all profits within those date ranges. Thus, they also include whatever other banners are live at the time, like weapons. The very first banner was of course none other than Mondstadt's own Archon. In our data, Venti's initial run still stands as the 5th highest grossing banner of all time, and is really no surprise considering how mind-blowingly successful Genshin's launch was. It was reported that globally from both the App Store and Google Play Store, the game made $60 million in only its first 2 weeks. Venti also was a good fit for the first limited character, since this was when every player was just starting out in the game having to level up their first teams. Because Venti just had easily the strongest utility while requiring next to no investment, it was a no-brainer for many players to seek him out. Genshin Lab also notes that this banner had an unusually high average per day, which was probably due to players deciding to spend after playing the game for a few days. I'm curious to know how much of these sales were for the standard banner though, because yeah, 5 stars were in high demand and very low supply at the time. The weapon banner also had a special appeal early on, because unlike artifacts, which would eventually have to be replaced by higher ranked ones, weapons just had to be upgraded like how your characters were. Following the game's first 3 weeks came Klee, who brought another huge commercial success at rank 9. Klee is undeniably cute, but more importantly was the first limited main DPS. Since the previous character was Venti, it was kind of expected that Klee would just be really good too. She ended up not aging that well, but that initial hype definitely pushed her sales hard. On top of the standard banner sales, one advantage the earlier versions had was that nobody knew how long it would take characters in general to get reruns, so the fear of missing out was quite a strong motivator. Next came 1.1, featuring the final third act of the Liyue Archon quest and the Childe boss fight. To pair alongside those, we of course got Childe and Zhongli's banners, who also had the 4 stars Diona and Xinyan to debut alongside them. It's not too surprising since it was right after launch, but this was the only time we got 4 banner characters in one update. Both of the 5 stars were in Acts 1 and 2, so players were already familiar with them, and their kits were so cool and very unique compared to the existing roster. They also both had amazing trailers leading up to their releases, thus they sit comfortably around the middle at 17th and 14th. One thing that may have negatively affected Childe a bit was the fact that the Heart of Depth artifact set didn't exist yet, and as a bow character he couldn't run gladiators, so he was in a bit of a weird spot during this update. This was also back when there was a huge community uproar about Zhongli being way too weak, which prompted an official article to be released 3 days before the end of his banner, announcing that he and Geo as a whole would be receiving buffs in 1.3. It's not like this announcement made his sales skyrocket or anything though, so it would seem that at that point, most players were already satisfied with their decision to roll for him or not. 1.2 gave us the Dragonspine area to explore, and since this was the first update to have its own special program livestream, we knew we would be getting Albedo and Ganyu next. Getting Albedo first though meant that there would be back-to-back Geo characters. Given the fact that it was known Geo was still in a pre-buff state, combined with Albedo just generally being seen as not that versatile, I'm not surprised he sits somewhat low at 22nd out of 30. Perhaps many players were just holding out for Ganyu, who ended up faring better, sitting right below Zhongli at 15th. It also helped that Ganyu had appeared earlier in the Liyue Archon quest, while Albedo was only introduced in this update. Right away, it was identified that her second level charge shot had absurdly high damage, and considering she was the first limited character which could possibly be considered a waifu, her success was pretty expected. After that came 1.3 and the first regional festival being the Lantern Rite. You might remember that this was the first and only time that Genshin featured 3 2-week long banners rather than the typical 3-week cycle. Kicking it off was Xiao, who many players already knew about from footage of the game's closed beta test. He was pretty hyped up, was heavily featured in that year's Lantern Rite quest, and was a solid DPS carry, but the fact that he had a shorter banner length did affect his performance. Most players tend to spend within the first few days of a banner dropping, but there are people who wait until the end. To put it in perspective, if we look at all banner sales at the end of day 14 of their runs, Xiao sits at 15th rather than 19th. After that was an interesting one, being Keqing's banner. In retrospect, it seems rather ridiculous to spend money on a character who you'd probably end up getting anyway from losing a 50-50, but at the time I thought it kind of made sense since sniping a specific standard banner 5-star isn't exactly reliable. Either way, it's a little surprising this banner's in 25th and not closer to the bottom, especially considering the ones below it ran for a week longer. This could have been because the 4-stars were pretty good, or because people just really liked Keqing, or more likely because the Staff of Homa, Wolf's Gravestone banner came out in the middle of it. Seriously, it went up 4 places between day 7 and day 14. Most of the weapon banners before it were not very appealing, so having 2 weapons that were easily the strongest of their respective types at the time was pretty good, even considering there was no pity system for these banners yet. This probably also affected the data for Hu Tao, since every other character was available in the same window as their signature weapons. Still though, Hu Tao was a fun character and very powerful in game, so you might be surprised to see her 2 spots below Xiao at 21st. The final contributor for this was the fact that Hu Tao literally came out of nowhere. There was a special program for 1.3, but if you missed it, you might be shocked to know that Hu Tao was not in it at all. It was speculated that because the Lantern Rite is an obvious parallel to Chinese New Year, it wouldn't have been appropriate to showcase a character who was so clearly associated with the concept of death. And so she was omitted from the livestream, the Keqing banner was implemented so her debut could be pushed to March, and the first official reveal of her was her teaser uploaded only 5 days before her banner. Between this and the shorter banner runtime, pretty much everything was stacked against Hu Tao for her initial run. 1.4 was much less complicated as it featured the first rerun banners alongside Mondstadt's Windbloom Festival. Venti's was first and it did well, ending up in 12th place. It's not surprising given that it had been almost half a year since his initial run, and since then Genshin had gotten many new players that had completely missed him. He got a lot of screen time in the event and was still just as useful a character in both the Overworld and Spiral Abyss. He also received a new signature weapon this time around with the Elegy of the End Bow. In contrast, Childe ended up in very last place. I would guess this was both because he had a pretty niche kit and because his initial run wasn't as long before. It also didn't help that he had no relevance in the update content and that his weapon banner featured 2 from the standard pool, so that's probably why they released Rosaria on his banner, but it didn't do much I suppose. In 1.5 we got Zhongli's second story quest and the Ajdaha boss fight. So it only made sense that the first banner was Zhongli's rerun, which also included Yanfei's release. You might think that because this was his first return after receiving his buffs in 1.3, that his sales would far surpass his initial run, but it didn't turn out that way at all. It would seem that for the most part, people who wanted him already had him, ranking him at 23rd. It also didn't help that his weapon banner was not very good. Not much further ahead is Eula's debut that ended at 20th, which I think is mainly attributed to her not receiving much spotlight and during a bit of a down period for the game. Besides her story quest that also came out at that time, people didn't really know who this character was since she appeared in no Archon quests or events, and this update just wasn't super exciting in general since the headlining content was a story quest and the addition of the Serenity Pot, neither of which were terrible, but they just didn't have the same level of general appeal as the regional festivals or new explorable areas. As a playable character, she was strong, but not as universally so as other characters due to her damage being physical and her playstyle being quite particular. Following that was 1.6's temporary set of islands, the Golden Apple Archipelago. To pair with Klee's heavy involvement in the quest, she got her rerun, and it came in second to last. Klee just wasn't very appealing when other DPS characters felt better to play, since Catalyst characters across the board are slower and therefore a bit clunkier in comparison. This was also when the first character outfits came out, with Barbara's being free and Jean's being paid, but selling that was bound to appeal only to a small group of players. Additionally, this would be the last time a weapon banner featured no limited 5-star weapons. After Klee came Kazuha as the first Inazuma character, introduced through a new Archon quest that would foreshadow the upcoming Inazuma region. Kazuha is currently hailed as one of the best units in the game for his elemental damage amplifying capabilities, so why did his banner only just barely beat out Keqing's? As you should expect by now, there were multiple potential factors in play. The first part of it was that it wasn't completely understood how strong he was, and many players felt that there wasn't much reason to get him if you already had a good Venti or Sucrose. The next thing was that although Kazuha was involved in the new Archon quest, it didn't show off his character as much as a story quest would, and it just so happens that Kazuha is the only limited 5-star in Genshin's history to not have a story quest paired with his release. And as the final nail in the coffin that really hurt his sales, he had so much competition. The Inazuma hype was already building up with the locations previewed at the end of the 1.6 special program, and then there was the reveal of Ayaka, Yoimiya, and Sayu, the origin of the iconic drip marketing tweet, and it only accelerated when the 2.0 special program aired only 10 days after Kazuha's banner dropped. This livestream showed off 9 characters who would go on to become playable in the future. There was just too much to be saving up for, and as a consequence, Kazuha's banner was seen as an easy skip. Now for his rerun though, that will most certainly be a different story when it comes. 2.0 and the region of Inazuma hit the live servers on July 21st, 2021, starting with Kamisato Ayaka. Just like Xiao, players were already familiar with Ayaka due to her being in the closed beta tests, but those who wanted to play her ended up waiting much longer. That anticipation and the fact that she was a very solid cryo DPS made her quite appealing, especially since her main competitor, Ganyu, played very differently and had her banner many months before. Ayaka ended relatively high at 13th, but the same can't be said for Yoimiya in 26th. She did release along Sayu, but Yoimiya was a pretty disappointing Pyro DPS with stiff competition. And because Genshin had finally started previewing their upcoming releases early with 2.0's characters, since they got tired of leakers doing it for them, it meant that players already knew the Raiden Shogun was just around the corner. Given that she was on everybody's wish list, it was not a good look for Yoimiya. So then 2.1 came out with a bang, headlining the Raiden Shogun and Kujosara. The conditions for this banner were perfect, which is why it stands at the highest grossing initial banner of any character and the third of all time. Let's start with the lead up, which began in Kazuha's cutscene from 1.6, giving us our first idea of what she would look like and how powerful she was. After that, in 2.0, the second act of the Archon quest had great looking cutscenes featuring her and our first battle with her. It left such a strong impression of how imposing her character was, which ended up being a huge contrast to her unexpectedly sad character teaser. So there was already massive hype for Raiden before 2.1 arrived, and this update completely capitalized on that. The final act of the Archon quest gave us many more iconic moments featuring her, and her story quest showed us another dimension to her character. She was cool, you could feel sympathetic for her backstory, and there were funny things about her to make memes out of. Her gameplay felt both powerful and unique, even if some players were upset by her lack of synergy with Beidou. And let's also not forget that in 2.1, the initial top-up bonuses for Genesis crystals were reset, giving players a little extra incentive to buy in. The Raiden Shogun's monetary success is completely understandable given just how perfectly her release was treated. Kokomi though, the exact opposite. Literally the worst performing initial banner. Sure, undeniably part of this was players blowing their savings on Raiden, but Hoyoverse certainly did not provide Kokomi with great conditions. Her appearance in the Archon quest didn't do a good job of showing off her supposed prowess as a military tactician, the Swordfish 2 subplot didn't come to fruition in the end, and it felt like her story quest did little to expand on her character. On the gameplay side of things, Kokomi was a healer in a market that had zero demand for healers. The Ocean Hued Clam artifact set wasn't created yet, so excess healing was completely worthless. Rift Hounds and the corrosion status didn't exist yet either, so shields were reliably able to block any incoming damage. There just weren't many reasons to pull for Kokomi, especially when a hugely anticipated rerun was on the way. 2.2 followed up with the Labyrinth Warriors event and Tsurumi Island, the first of which featured Child, giving us our first ever second rerun. At 27th, this one did a bit better than his previous rerun, probably in part due to him having a new signature weapon, but in terms of his kit, he still just wasn't as appealing as the many other main DPS characters that came out after him. The real star of this update though was Hu Tao and Thoma. Despite not having any relevance to the update content whatsoever, she ended up at 7th because this banner was not plagued by any of the factors which impacted her initial run. Hu Tao is still a premier pyro DPS, is an all-around popular character, has a first constellation that is both strong and convenient, and had a weapon banner with 2 good features, so it should have been expected. In 2.3's Shadows Amidst Snowstorms, we returned to Mondstadt's Dragonspine, and so Albedo and Eula's reruns came along with it. By this point, there were enough limited banners in existence to necessitate running 2 of them simultaneously, and this was a great move considering 6 of the top 10 banners are doubled up. Both of these characters were great in the event and are very strong on teams which make the most of their kits, landing them in 9th. After that came Arataki Itto, whose banner had a pretty standard performance for an initial run, clocking in at 18th. He's a good character, and since Goro released alongside him, Geo-heavy teams became a lot stronger. The only story content we got of him was his own story quest, but it was definitely enough to show off his comedic personality. The first rerun of a regional festival came with the Lantern Rites comeback in 2.4, and although Xiao wasn't the focus of the event quest this time, he was 100% due for a rerun, having been gone almost a year. Alongside him came the new characters from the new Archon quest, Shenhe and Yunjin. They both had large roles in the new Archon quest, and Yunjin had been hinted at before, but Shenhe had not, and she didn't have a dedicated story quest. Shenhe was pretty niche since she only fit into cryo teams, and Xiao is good but was never regarded as a must-have DPS, so these had the lowest performance of the dual banners, coming in at 10th. Continuing with the trend of Liyue characters, Zhongli and Ganyu's reruns came shortly after. I'd imagine Ganyu had a greater presence than Zhongli since she had been gone for so long, but both of these characters aged extremely well with their powerful kits, so putting them up at the same time was bound to do numbers. 2.5 was pretty light, with the main content being new story quests for Raiden Shogun and the finally playable Yae Miko. The first banner was Yae, who did quite average, ending up at 16th. She definitely was hyped up, since she had been in the game as an NPC from the start of Inazuma, and I think her banner could have been better if not for her kit. The general consensus was that she wasn't super good. I truly felt she had major design flaws that made her boring, and her weapon's passive is ridiculously niche. After that came Raiden and Kokomi's reruns, which I was personally surprised to see overtake Raiden's initial run, barely landing 2nd place. All of the reasons why Raiden's first banner succeeded were still there, barring the initial Inazuma hype, and now there was an extra story quest to explore the more emotional aspects of the character, as well as her puppet's final form as a new weekly boss. Kokomi definitely became a bit more appealing with the introduction of the ocean-hued clam set and Rift Hounds' corrosion, so that helped too. In 2.6, we got Inazuma's first celebration, the Itadori Festival, which involved all 3 of the characters who got banners in this update. In the first half, Kamisato Ayato was released, and he was definitely someone many players were looking forward to. He was mentioned a lot in Aika and Thoma's character stories, and was in the voice lines for a few more characters, and just from his brief line in Ito's trailer, it seemed that many were excited for him. Some in-game details foreshadowed his element and weapon type, but eventually he released as a solid Hydro DPS with rather unique gameplay, putting him at 8th. Oh yeah, also Venti was there, but I'm pretty sure most of that money went to Ayato. Following that came Aika's rerun, who was definitely sought after because of her strength as a DPS and the fact that she was no longer in competition with Raiden Shogun, but of course the reason that her banner is the #1 highest grossing was because 2.7 got delayed by 3 weeks. Her ranking by the end of week 3 was actually in 7th, but the additional 21 days was enough to count another $10 million towards her banner. 7th is still quite high though, which could have been in part thanks to the beautiful animation that got released portraying Aika's Vision origin story. 2.7 gave us the Hidden Dreams in the Depths event in the recently released Chasm area of Liyue, spotlighting the featured 5 stars Yelan and Xiao. It wasn't that long after Xiao's other rerun, but the event quest did give him a lot of exposition with the reveals of the other 4 Yakshas, and he received a signature artifact set with the Vermilion Hereafter line. Yelan, on the other hand, didn't have much build up to her release, but brandished a very strong and cool looking kit. I also think the trailers heavily appealed to a certain subset of the player base. The weapon banner this time was also very solid, with 2 crit substat weapons that can boost the performance of a ton of characters. These 2 came third, but were the highest grossing in Japan according to that data. So yeah, I guess people just really liked Yelan's gameplay and design. As of the time of recording this, Ito's rerun banner with Kuki Shinobu is ongoing, but seems to be on track towards the bottom. I'm not surprised considering his initial run was pretty recent, and we know Sumeru is on the way. It was just announced that 2.8 will have Kazuha and Klee with Shikanoe and Heizo, then Yoimiya. Because of the Sumeru hype, I'm expecting Kazuha to be in the lower top 10 and Yoimiya to be near the bottom. I'm definitely not qualified for any kind of business analytics, but based on my observations of these banners, I would personally rank the factors for a banner's financial performance as first, how strong their kit is, followed by the amount of exposure they get before and during their banners, and lastly, the amount of competition. Constellations might also play a bigger role than I expect, but it's harder to judge whether players roll for them because they are strong or simply because they really like those characters. So that's about it for the video. I'm pretty certain there are some other banner specific things which I might have forgotten to mention, so feel free to check the comments for any corrections on things I might have missed or gotten wrong. I hope you found this video to be interesting or insightful, and as always, thanks for watching.